Growing up on a Kansas wheat farm, Lisa French had limited experience with bodies of water. When she landed in a job that tied farming to water, a new world opened up. Now she is a proponent of Watershed Democracy.
I grew up on a farm west of Hutchinson where the land is really flat. Any kind of water seems pretty distant. I mostly knew water in other places like Colorado or Canopolis Lake. Kansas streams and rivers were somewhat otherworldly in my book. Occasionally we would pack up the fishing poles and drive to Salt Creek for a family outing. But in all honesty, the fishing part wasn't so appealing to me. It was the change from flat fields to those prairie streams that was captivating. They had carp and catfish and snapping turtles and was like visiting another planet. As you can see by this Reno County road map, a lot of my life is rectangular. There's a little red dot in the middle, that's the square mile where I live, and then Center Township, which is 36 square miles, and the county, which is square or rectangular, and it's in the state of Kansas, which is rectangular, all straight lines. And then 15 years ago, I was hired to lead the Cheney Lake Water Quality Project. My job is to encourage farmers to protect water quality. The twist is that I work in a watershed, a boundary determined not by that grid that we saw or geopolitical boundaries, but by the flow of water. Cheney Lake Watershed spans parts of 5 counties. That's interesting. 1,000 square miles from Haviland through Pratt and Stafford counties, corners of Kingman County, most of the southern half of Reno County, all the land that drains to Cheney Reservoir, being the North Fork of the Nenasko. Cheney Reservoir is important. It's a place for recreation, it's habitat for birds and fish and all manner of life, and it is the primary source of drinking water for the city of Wichita and the surrounding towns, more than 400,000 people. Shortly after starting my job, I read about John Wesley Powell. In 1869, this one-armed Civil War veteran led 10 men in 4 wooden boats on a 3-month, 1,000-mile scientific expedition down the unexplored Colorado through the Grand Canyon. Afterwards, Powell said we need to organize the arid regions of our country by watersheds, not grids, so that people are united by their most precious resource, water. My friend and esteemed environmental historian Don Worster calls this watershed democracy. Predictably, the United States did not organize any political boundaries by watersheds. But I realized my new job had landed me right in the middle of a watershed democracy where local residents are organized to address water issues on a watershed basis. We were able to do this through a partnership with the city of Wichita, agreeing that farmers would manage the program. They would educate and recruit their neighbors. The city would provide funding for outreach and cost share dollars for installing terraces or planting cover crops or whatever the farmers felt would be the most benefit to their farms and to water quality. Working on a watershed basis requires you to rethink normal procedures that are usually done on a county basis. Instead of thinking about county boundaries, we identify people and farms by their streams: Red Rock, Goose Creek, Silver Creek, Irish, Wolf, Dooleyville Creek. This local example of watershed democracy has become a model for programs both in and outside Kansas. We regularly get inquiries from people around the country who want to hear how this public-private partnership works. How can we replicate it elsewhere? Why doesn't Des Moines do this instead of suing their neighboring farms? Although my work is really about creating healthy soil and farms, it also takes me into the water. We have assisted scientists collecting data for dozens of water-related studies. Perhaps the most intense was this 7-year study on bank erosion that involved a lot of measuring, a lot of curious cows, and long days in the field. Sometimes my work with streams involves kids. We love to work in the watershed schools with classroom visits to Pretty Prairie, Partridge, and Fairfield. But the best days are when the kids come to the river to learn about macroinvertebrates and fish and discover water for themselves. With kids, it progresses to a lot of splashing and wading and floating. But whether it's farmers or students at the river, we connect the way we use the land to the impact on the stream and the critters that live there, and to our neighbors downstream who drink the water. A nice sidelight of my work has been a collection of historic images. I found this postcard on eBay. The river is identified as the Ninnascaw. The writer, Nellie King, sends greetings in Spanish to Miss Bessie Campbell in Mexico with the 1906 Cheney, Kansas postmark. Here's an image from the early 1900s of hand fishing expedition in the Ninnascaw on the High Ranch south of Partridge. The fellows are proudly displaying a 48-pound catfish, not unlike the one in the upper left at one of our river field days for farmers. As I've learned about streams, I've also learned about groundwater. We fund livestock watering system for ranchers using groundwater, and I find myself sitting in policy meetings often discussing aquifers, irrigation permits, and sustainable pumping levels. For 8 years, I served on the Kansas Water Authority, providing advice on water policy for state government. This is where I witnessed firsthand a couple of old adages: whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And my favorite, water runs uphill towards money. Though my feet are still not too often wet, my life is now immersed in Kansas water. You too can join Watershed Democracy by learning about your watershed and finding your own connections to Kansas water. And one more shout out for Patsy Terrell for her work on water issues in her short time in Topeka.